What if the brightest lights in music were hiding the darkest shadows? This is more than a story about pop songs. It's a journey into fame, love, heartbreak, and the fragile bonds behind Abba's glittering success. Because at the height of their triumph, when the whole world was singing along, something was quietly unraveling. Before we go deeper, take a moment for yourself. Breathe, sip some water, and settle in. The story you're about to hear deserves your full heart. Abba was once the unstoppable force of the music world, selling over 400 million records and gifting us timeless anthems like Dancing Queen and Mamma Mia. Yet behind the dazzling costumes, the euphoric performances, and the soaring chart numbers lay a hidden narrative of pressure, heartbreak, and personal struggles that few truly saw. How could a band that seemed to have everything suddenly vanish from the spotlight? Abba is one of those rare bands that instantly stirs nostalgia. Whether you grew up hearing their records on vinyl or stumbled across their hits decades later, you've likely felt the magic they carried into the world of music. But how did four friends from Sweden transform themselves into global icons? Their rise wasn't merely luck. It was a perfect storm of raw talent, impeccable timing, and a fairy tale chemistry that captivated audiences everywhere. The transformation from a modest Swedish act into international icons is a story as thrilling as any of their songs. Their journey started in the late 1960s, long before the world recognized their name. Two young musicians, Björn Ulvaeus and Benny Andersson, were chasing their dreams in the local music scene. Björn played with a folk group, the Hootenanny Singers, while Benny was the keyboardist for a rock band called the Hepstars. Neither man knew it yet, but fate had already begun weaving their paths together. When Björn and Benny eventually met, the spark between them was instant. Their musical chemistry was undeniable, and soon songwriting became their shared language. Around this same time, two gifted women were carving out their own identities. Agnetha Fältskog, a solo artist with a voice that could melt hearts, and Annie Frid Lyngstad, or Frida, a sophisticated jazz singer whose sultry elegance set her apart. They too were on their own journeys, unaware that their lives were about to intertwine with Björn and Benny in a way that would change everything. By the early 1970s, Björn and Benny had officially begun writing songs as a duo, and their compositions were gaining momentum. It wasn't long before their significant others, Agnetha and Frida, joined in, first as an informal experiment. Singing together at parties and small gatherings, they quickly realized that the blend of their four voices created something magical. More than harmony, it was a sound with soul. That spark caught fire in 1973 when the group entered Melodifestivalen, Sweden's national competition for Eurovision. Though they didn't win, they returned in 1974, stronger and bolder with a song called Waterloo. The performance in Brighton was nothing short of revolutionary. Their dazzling costumes, infectious stage energy, and electrifying pop-rock sound broke every Eurovision mold. They didn't just win. They redefined the competition, launching themselves onto the international stage with a bang. The success of Waterloo was explosive. Practically overnight, the world was enchanted by this quirky quartet with the unusual acronym for a name, Abba, formed from the initials of Agnetha, Björn, Benny, and Annie Frid. Their energy was irresistible. Following up with hits like Honey Honey and Ring Ring, they cemented their reputation as pop royalty. But Abba's appeal was never just about catchy tunes. It was the image, the chemistry, the palpable joy they projected, a combination that made it impossible to look away. And while their music soared higher and higher, behind the glitter, the first cracks in the fairy tale were beginning to form. The mid-1970s marked the moment when Abba truly exploded into a worldwide phenomenon. Their albums flew off the shelves faster than they could be pressed, and their songs conquered charts in countries where English wasn't even the first language. It didn't matter if listeners didn't understand every lyric. The irresistible melodies and rhythms made people want to dance anyway. In 1976, Dancing Queen was released, and it quickly became their defining anthem. It didn't just top charts around the globe. It secured Abba's place forever in the history of music. It was the kind of song that could make anyone feel unstoppable, even if they were just moving to the beat in their own living room. Yet Abba's magic went far beyond catchy hooks and glittering performances. What made them truly unforgettable was the way they made people feel. Abba wasn't simply a band. They were a mood, a vibe, an entire experience wrapped in sound. Fans connected deeply with their songs, which managed to capture emotions both universal and intimate. From the wistful longing in Fernando to the playful flirtation of Take a Chance on Me, Abba had an uncanny ability to translate feelings into melodies that the whole world could sing along to. Of course, immense success came hand in hand with immense pressure. By the late 1970s, Abba was one of the most in-demand acts in the world. Their concerts sold out within minutes, their albums shattered records, and their fame showed no signs of slowing down. But life at the top wasn't nearly as effortless as it looked from the outside. Behind the curtain, the group worked tirelessly, spending long, exhausting hours in the studio to perfect their sound. Benny and Bjorn, in particular, were known as meticulous songwriters, unwilling to settle for anything less than flawless execution. That relentless pursuit of excellence propelled Abba to unprecedented heights, but it also introduced tension into their creative process. Still, one of the secrets to their longevity was their willingness to reinvent themselves. While many bands of the era clung tightly to formulas that worked, Abba dared to explore new sounds, new stories, and new emotions. Their songs weren't just pop hits. They were miniature works of art, capturing fleeting moments of love, longing, and joy in a way that resonated with millions. And their influence extended far beyond music. Their flamboyant fashion choices and theatrical stage presence made them pioneers of pop culture, trendsetters whose looks and style became nearly as iconic as their songs. By the dawn of the 1980s, Abba had already achieved what most artists could only dream of. Millions upon millions of records sold, countless awards collected, and an indelible legacy etched into the foundation of modern music. Yet even as they basked in that glittering success, the cracks beneath the surface began to widen. Fame brought its pressures, and personal realities began to weigh heavily on each member. The tale of Abba's rise was nothing short of spectacular, but as history often reminds us, what rises sky high eventually faces the pull of gravity. Because behind the shimmering spotlight, Abba's story wasn't just about music. It was about people. Their songs were radiant, alive, and full of color. But the relationships between the band members were just as complex, if not more so. After all, imagine being in a group where your artistic partner was also your romantic partner. It sounded like the perfect fairy tale on the surface, but the truth behind it all was far more complicated. Take a deep breath before we continue. Sometimes stories about beauty and brilliance carry a shadow too. As we step further into Abba's journey, keep a little space in your heart for the people behind the music. As Abba soared to heights few bands could ever dream of, the very relationships that had once given them strength began to slowly unravel, shaping not only their music but also the legacy they would eventually leave behind. At the heart of Abba were not just four performers, but two married couples, Agnetha and Bjorn, Benny and Annie Frid. Their love stories weren't simply backdrops. They were woven into the very fabric of the band, giving every song an emotional weight that felt authentic. When Abba sang of love, longing, or heartbreak, listeners believed it, because those emotions were lived, not imagined. But that intimacy carried its own risks. With fame came scrutiny, and suddenly their private lives were under a magnifying glass. The fairy tale glow of being both lovers and collaborators began to fade as the pressures of relentless touring, long recording sessions, and global stardom mounted. In the early years, Agnetha and Bjorn seemed like the golden couple. Her angelic voice blended seamlessly with his sharp songwriting talent, creating a partnership that felt unstoppable. Yet the higher Abba climbed, the more demanding their world became. The endless cycle of travel and performance left little time for the quiet, grounding moments a marriage needs. Agnetha in particular felt the strain. She longed for home, for her children, for the sense of stability that had slowly slipped away as Abba transformed from a Swedish pop act into a worldwide phenomenon. Benny and Annie Frid too faced their own storm. What began as a passionate bond seemed unshakable at first. Benny, the creative mastermind who helped drive Abba's sound, and Frida, the sophisticated, elegant singer who gave the group its unique flair. Together they were dazzling. But as the years passed, their careers and personal ambitions placed new demands on their relationship. What had once united them slowly began to pull them apart. By the late 1970s, the cracks were beginning to show. Their songs, glittering on the surface, started to reveal shadows beneath. Hits like Knowing Me, Knowing You, and The Name of the Game carried a darker, more introspective tone, hinting at turmoil just below the glossy veneer. Fans may not have realized it then, but these weren't just love songs. They were emotional diaries, set to melody, capturing the real struggles of the people singing them. The turning point arrived in 1979 when Agnetha and Björn announced their divorce. To the public, it was shocking. How could the couple whose chemistry had inspired some of the most romantic pop songs in the world fall apart? Yet those close to the band knew the pressures had become too heavy to bear. What was remarkable, though, was the decision they made afterward to keep working together. Day after day, Agnetha had to stand in a studio and sing words written by her ex-husband, words that often cut painfully close to her own reality. It was a testament to both professionalism and resilience that the band carried on. But the strain did not end there. Just 2 years later, Benny and Annie Fried also announced their separation, and suddenly all 4 members of Abba were no longer bound by romance, only by music. The band that had once been fueled by love was now running on a fragile balance of artistry and emotional endurance. And yet, from this turbulence, beauty emerged. Some of Abba's most haunting and unforgettable songs were born out of this era. The Winner Takes It All stands as perhaps the most striking example. A ballad so raw and piercing that it continues to resonate decades later. Sung by Agnetha with a trembling vulnerability, it felt less like performance and more like confession. Björn always denied that it was autobiographical, but for millions of listeners, the pain in her voice was too real to dismiss. This paradox, heartbreak turned into art, endings transformed into anthems, was the bittersweet core of Abba's story in those years. And as their personal lives unraveled, their music only grew more profound, setting the stage for what would come next. Despite the emotional turbulence swirling around them, Abba's professionalism never faltered. They kept showing up for recording sessions, stepping onto stages, and delivering the polished performances their fans expected. On the surface, the group maintained a united front, but behind the glittering facade, the atmosphere was shifting. The once effortless friendships that had been the foundation of their bond were now under strain. It wasn't that they stopped caring for one another, not at all, but the weight of their shared history, combined with the unrelenting pressure of sustaining global success, created a tension that could no longer be ignored. By the early 1980s, those hidden cracks were becoming increasingly visible. Their music, though still rich and beautifully crafted, began to carry a weary undertone. Songs like One of Us and When All Is Said and Done resonated with an air of finality, as if the band members were quietly bidding farewell, not only to their fans, but perhaps to one another. The vibrant joy that once defined their biggest hits had shifted into something more reflective, more bittersweet. It's important to remember that Abba was never just a band. They were a family. And like any family, they had moments of harmony and moments of discord. What made their story remarkable was how they transformed those private experiences into music. Each song became more than just a catchy pop tune. It was a snapshot of their lives, an echo of their emotions, capturing both the euphoria of love and the ache of heartbreak with striking honesty. That honesty is what set Abba apart. They didn't simply sing about love and loss. They lived it, and that authenticity seeped into every lyric and every note. By the dawn of the 1980s, Abba found themselves standing at a crossroads. Their melodies remained irresistible, their storytelling sharp as ever, but the emotional weight of their personal struggles began to bleed into every corner of their professional lives. Making music was no longer just about creating hits. It had become an act of holding the band together, of navigating the storm of unresolved emotions and fragile dynamics that surrounded them. The small fractures that appeared after the divorces were widening into deep fissures. Years of working side by side, celebrating triumphs, weathering failures, and sharing both creative breakthroughs and personal heartbreaks had left their mark. What had once been a shared dream of 4 close friends was beginning to feel more like a heavy burden. They weren't only producing music anymore, they were balancing the tightrope between duty and emotion. Adding to this strain was the constant glare of the spotlight. The media followed their every move, dissecting lyrics, performances, even body language. Fans speculated endlessly. Were the songs coded messages between former lovers? Were they intimate conversations set to music? The world wasn't just consuming Abba's art, it was devouring their private lives. Inside the studio, the atmosphere was no less intense. Benny and Björn, long recognized as the creative heartbeat of the group, began steering the ship more decisively. Their vision was evolving, pushing Abba toward darker, more sophisticated, and emotionally layered sounds. This new direction yielded some of their most mature and resonant work, music that still moves listeners decades later. But with innovation came friction, as the balance of collaboration subtly shifted and the weight of change settled heavily over the group. For Agnetha and Annie Frid, the unmistakable voices that had carried Abba to worldwide fame, the band's shifting direction was not always easy to embrace. The smooth harmony and effortless collaboration that once defined their sound began to feel more like a tug of war, each new song pulling them in directions that didn't always align with their instincts. This creative tension came to the surface most clearly during the making of The Visitors, ABBA's final studio album. Gone was the bright, carefree sparkle of the Dancing Queen era. In its place stood a band that had weathered storms, both personal and professional, and the music reflected it. The Visitors was dark, introspective, and heavy with meaning. Its tracks explored themes of isolation, uncertainty, and the quiet ache of time slipping away. Songs like When All Is Said and Done and One of Us weren't just melodies. They were farewells wrapped in bittersweet lyrics and haunting arrangements. Listening to that album, you can almost feel the weight pressing on each note, the sense that this was not only a record, but a confession. Yet even as their music grew more somber, ABBA's dedication never wavered. They continued to show up for their fans with the same dazzling energy that had made them icons. On stage, the smiles, the choreography, and the flawless harmonies gave little away. If you had been in the audience at one of their concerts, you might never have guessed the storm behind the curtain. But behind those smiles lay exhaustion and the effort of holding together a band when their personal lives had already unraveled was becoming harder and harder to bear. Adding to the strain was the rapidly changing music landscape of the early 1980s. Pop was evolving at lightning speed. The disco sound that had once carried ABBA to the top was losing ground, replaced by the rise of synth pop, new wave, and fresh voices who were redefining the charts. Though ABBA had always been willing to adapt, now they were doing so while carrying the emotional baggage of fractured relationships and diverging ambitions. Keeping pace with an industry in flux is hard enough, but doing so while barely holding a band together felt almost impossible. Still, ABBA pressed on. They released a handful of songs that showcased their evolving artistry, including the hauntingly beautiful The Day Before You Came. Many fans regard it as one of their most poignant works, a song that feels both deeply personal and eerily prophetic. But by this point, the writing was on the wall. The members weren't just weighed down by creative and emotional challenges. They were also beginning to look beyond ABBA. Benny and Björn started turning their attention toward musical theater, planting the seeds for future projects like chess. Agnetha and Annie Frid, meanwhile, looked to establish themselves as solo artists. Their focus was shifting, and it was clear that ABBA was no longer the sole priority for any of them. By the end of 1982, the band quietly decided to step back. They didn't call it a breakup, at least not publicly. To fans and the press, it was framed as taking a break, a chance for each member to explore individual projects. But as the months turned into years, it became undeniable. The break was permanent. ABBA had reached the end, not with fireworks or scandal, but with a gentle, bittersweet goodbye. There was no dramatic collapse, no explosive fight to make headlines. The end came slowly, inevitably, like a curtain falling softly after the final act. And perhaps that was fitting. A respectful, graceful close from a group who had always cared deeply about their legacy and their fans. Instead of letting turmoil define them, they let their music speak, leaving behind a body of work that continues to shine timelessly. When ABBA finally stepped away from the spotlight, it wasn't just the end of a band. It felt like the closing of a golden chapter in pop history itself. For years, their music had been so deeply woven into the cultural fabric that imagining a world without new ABBA songs seemed almost unthinkable. And yet, as the four members quietly went their separate ways, the story didn't stop. Instead, it shifted into a new phase, one filled with nostalgia, reinvention, and the lasting proof of just how powerful their music truly was. The 1980s became a curious decade for ABBA's legacy. While the members pursued solo projects, the group's collective presence seemed to slip into the background. Pop music was evolving quickly. Disco had faded, new wave and synth pop were taking over, and ABBA's glittering, melodic sound no longer matched the trends of the day. For Benny and Björn, the transition meant channeling their energy into musical theater. Together, they created Chess, a bold and ambitious project that showcased their gift for writing intricate, emotionally charged music. This wasn't just a side venture. It was a new artistic chapter. Songs like I Know Him So Well became hits in their own right, proving that Benny and Björn's creative brilliance could flourish even outside of ABBA. Meanwhile, Agnetha and Anni-Frid took very different paths. Agnetha launched a solo career, releasing albums that highlighted her ethereal voice and vulnerability. Though she found success, it was clear the spotlight weighed heavily on her. Always the most private member of the group, Agnetha struggled with life beyond ABBA's protective bubble. The relentless media attention only amplified her unease, and instead of finding peace after the band's breakup, she seemed to retreat further into herself. It was heartbreaking for fans who adored her, as the very freedom she might have hoped for brought little relief. Anni-Frid, on the other hand, embraced her independence with determination. She released Something's Going On in 1982, produced by Phil Collins, a striking departure from ABBA's polished pop. The album carried a darker, rock-infused energy that revealed a new side of her artistry, earning critical praise and commercial success. For a time, Anni-Frid thrived in her solo career, but like her bandmates, she too eventually chose to step back from the relentless demands of the industry, trading the spotlight for a quieter, more private life. As the years passed, ABBA's absence left a noticeable void in the music world. Their departure was bittersweet for fans. They had given so much joy, but no other artist quite managed to fill the space they left behind. Yet their music itself refused to disappear. Instead, it began to grow in stature, becoming larger than the band itself, steadily gaining new meaning and relevance. The turning point came in the 1990s, when ABBA's music experienced an extraordinary revival. It began with the release of ABBA Gold, a greatest hits compilation that instantly reminded the world of the band's brilliance. The album was a runaway success, selling millions and reintroducing classics like Mamma Mia and Dancing Queen to a whole new generation. Suddenly, ABBA wasn't just a memory from the past. They were a sensation once more. What made this resurgence remarkable was how organic it felt. Their music had always been timeless, but in the 1990s, it seemed to resonate with fresh energy. ABBA songs began appearing in movies, TV shows, and commercials, becoming cultural touchstones that felt as alive as they had decades earlier. For younger audiences, ABBA was fresh, fun, and irresistibly catchy. For longtime fans, it was like rediscovering an old friend. And then came the moment that truly cemented their comeback, the debut of Mamma Mia in 1999. Premiering in London's West End, the jukebox musical took ABBA's greatest hits and spun them into a heartwarming, feel-good story. It was more than a stage show. It was a celebration, a joyous reimagining of ABBA's music that captured both the spirit of the band and the hearts of audiences worldwide. When the stage musical Mamma Mia leapt from theater to screen in 2008, with Meryl Streep leading a glittering, star-studded cast, it didn't just become a global box office sensation. It sealed ABBA's place in pop culture for all time. What had begun as a nostalgic celebration of their music suddenly transformed into a worldwide phenomenon, introducing their songs to millions who had never experienced ABBA in their prime. What makes this chapter so extraordinary is how completely it defied expectations. Most bands fade into the background once they split up, their biggest hits tucked away on oldies playlists or buried in the dusty corners of memory. But ABBA's story was different. Their songs didn't simply endure, they thrived, becoming even bigger, even more beloved than when they first ruled the charts. Their melodies seemed to travel effortlessly across generations, resonating with new listeners while reigniting the passion of lifelong fans. It was a rare kind of magic, a testament to their artistry, their gift for storytelling, and their uncanny ability to distill universal human emotions into music that felt both personal and profound. Yet as ABBA's legacy grew brighter, one question lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. Would they ever reunite? Fans couldn't help but dream about it, and interviewers never stopped asking. The band members, though gracious, were always careful in their answers. They left the door ever so slightly ajar, but they made it clear that a reunion wasn't on the horizon. There was no animosity between them, By all accounts, the four remained bound by deep affection, but they understood that the unique alchemy of Abba was tied to a specific moment in time. Trying to recreate that magic risked breaking the spell. Still, the dream refused to fade. Hints and whispers surfaced from time to time, each one sending a ripple of hope through their global fan base. And then, in 2016, came a spark that reignited the fire. Abba reunited for a private performance at a party in Stockholm. It was brief, it was intimate, but for fans, it was nothing short of extraordinary. Watching Agnetha, Bjorn, Benny, and Annie Fried together again felt like stepping into a time machine, a fleeting but powerful reminder of the joy they had shared with the world. That's the fascinating thing about ABBA's story. Even decades after their so-called ending, it continued to evolve. Their music remained as present as ever, a soundtrack to countless lives. For younger generations, songs like Dancing Queen felt as fresh as if they had been released yesterday. For older fans, the music carried the weight of cherished memories. ABBA's magic endured because it was timeless, because it spoke to the heart in ways that never dulled with age. Their journey wasn't without struggle, but what emerged was a story of resilience, creativity, and the unshakable power of music to bridge generations. When ABBA finally announced they were returning with new music, the world reacted with a mix of disbelief and pure excitement. Could they possibly recapture the magic after all these years? What would ABBA sound like in the 21st century, after decades of silence, after so many changes in music and in life itself? Fans were torn between hope and cautious curiosity. But one thing was certain, the anticipation was electric. The road to this moment had been long and complicated. For years, the idea of a reunion hovered in the background like a distant dream. It wasn't that the band had fallen out. In fact, the members had remained on good terms, but they were acutely aware of the risks. How do you return after 4 decades without being crushed under the weight of impossible expectations? How do you meet a world that has turned you into legends, almost mythological figures? It was not a decision made lightly. Yet, as Benny later explained, the timing eventually felt right. They rediscovered a way of working together that was natural, free of pressure, and, most importantly, joyful. That sense of ease became the foundation for a new chapter. What made their comeback so special was its authenticity. ABBA wasn't trying to chase trends or compete with younger artists dominating the charts. They weren't interested in recreating the glittering disco of the past. Instead, they chose to be true to themselves, to create music that reflected who they were now, as individuals and as a band with decades of lived experience. The result was Voyage, their 2021 album, a work that felt both timeless and modern, as if a bridge had been built between the ABBA of the 1970s and the ABBA of today. Each song carried the weight of memory and the spark of renewal. Tracks like I Still Have Faith in You and Don't Shut Me Down weren't just new additions to their catalog. They were deeply personal reflections on resilience, love, and the passage of time. Listening to them, you could feel the heart poured into every lyric, every harmony, every note. And while nostalgia was woven through the album, it never slipped into imitation of their past. Voyage was less a trip down memory lane and more a celebration of everything they had been, and everything they still were capable of becoming. But the surprises didn't stop there. Alongside the album came a groundbreaking project that pushed the boundaries of live music, the Voyage Virtual Concert. Using state-of-the-art technology, ABBA appeared on stage as digital avatars, perfect recreations of their younger selves, performing alongside a live band in a custom-built arena in London. The idea was daring, almost unimaginable, but it worked. Fans were transported back in time while still experiencing something entirely new. The reaction was nothing short of phenomenal. Critics and audiences alike praised the show for its innovation and its emotional power. It struck a delicate balance between nostalgia and reinvention, proving that ABBA hadn't returned just to relive old glory. They had come back to add another unforgettable chapter to their story. What has always set ABBA apart is the way their music connects with people. From the beginning, their songs captured universal emotions, the thrill of love, the ache of heartbreak, the hope of starting over. Voyage carried that same spirit, reminding listeners that even after 40 years, the band's magic still shone brightly. The results spoke for themselves. The album topped charts worldwide, while the virtual concerts drew fans of all ages, from those who had grown up with Abba to teenagers hearing them for the very first time. Though the band members themselves stayed largely out of the spotlight, their presence was undeniable in every song, every lyric, every carefully crafted detail. Looking back now, Abba's journey feels almost surreal. From 4 young dreamers in Sweden to global icons, they weathered the storms of fame, love, and heartbreak, and still found a way to circle back, to remind the world why it had fallen in love with them in the first place. Their story isn't just about chart-topping success. It's about resilience, creativity, and the enduring power of music to bring people together across time and space. And maybe that's the most beautiful part of it all. Abba's story never truly ended. It simply keeps evolving, just like the emotions their songs continue to stir. But now I'd love to hear from you. What does Abba's comeback mean to you? Did Voyage feel like a return to old friends, or the start of something entirely new? Share your thoughts. And while you do, maybe take a deep breath, sip some water, and let the music linger a little longer.